So in this first module, we're going to explore what is design thinking. You will learn the foundational concepts of design thinking and how it drives creative and effective problem solving in various contexts. At its essence, design thinking is a user-centered problem-solving methodology, and it's one that organizations can leverage to address the complex challenges that we're facing and also adapt to fast-evolving environments. And the value of design thinking really is twofold. First, it combines systematic reasoning, so there's a process for figuring out what's going on, with intuition and collaboration. So you're working together with others, ideally, and pretty much always actually in partnership with the end users, or the people that are going to use the product or service or system that you're redesigning or trying to redesign. We're working together to envision, to explore, and to test different options and optimal future outcomes. So it's a really good way to think of design thinking as being a process for solving complicated problems. And it's a process that has specific steps to it. Now, as many years ago now, Herbert Simon famously defined design as the transformation of existing conditions into preferred ones. And I really like this definition because I think that really gets at what we need to do and what we are doing. We're trying to, and we are changing existing conditions into the ones that we prefer. And design really excels at that. You know, design is the creation of something that didn't exist beforehand. And it can be thought of as learning by doing. And so the hands-on user-centered design thinking framework we're going to walk through is a problem-solving tool that's designed to spark innovation through inspiration, ideation, and implementation. Now, we'll be using the D-School approach to design thinking as a framework, and that typically talks about having 5 key steps, although we like to add a 6th step, which is assess. And let me talk through each of those now. And there are videos outlining in much more detail each of these steps. And if you look in the learning resources, there's some additional readings and resources that if you want to dive a little bit more deeper into each of these, you can. But the first step is empathy. Okay, and that is the number 1 step always, because to solve a problem, we need empathy with the end users, with the situation, with whatever the problem is. We need to empathize to understand. So we need to understand what is the user experience, you know, what is their perspective, you know, why are they behaving the way they are, and what needs to change, you know, for us to change or transform the situation to be the way that we would like it to be. And so we always in design thinking begin with empathy. And we'll walk through a number of different exercises that will help you become much more experienced in stepping into the end user's shoes and engaging with their perspective. And by doing that, that will transform the solutions that are created. The second step is to define the problem statement, to really dwell in the problem and be really clear on what the problem is that you're trying to solve. Okay, and we do that usually by having a very clear how might we? How might we engage the community with a specific technology? Okay, so we are very clear on the problem and we refine it as a how might we statement because it makes that phrasing is kind of optimistic and positive. Okay, and so those 2 steps are very much in what we would say the problem space, understanding the experience and being very clear about what the problem is. And you'll see your workbook and your worksheets have a number of exercises to help you dwell in this space. The third step, and I often think this is perhaps my most favorite step, is the process of ideation. It's just the fancy word for coming up with lots of different ideas. Essentially, collective mind, so multiple people generate multiple creative ideas. And then we've got a lot of tools and techniques that will help you do this. And this process of ideation is very much about what might be, a lot of creativity and potential. It's very, very important here. The fourth step is the prototyping, and that's where we develop multiple low fidelity, so they're easily made, easily changed. They could just be made out of cardboard or paper. They're quick, they're easy, they're low cost, multiple. It could be just one or two, or it could be many. We develop some low fidelity prototypes that we then use to get user feedback, and that's step 5. So now we're in the solution space, and we're prototyping different solutions, and we're testing them. Okay, and we're sharing and testing, and we're trying to find out what works and what does not. And then that's step 5, testing and being very clear about, okay, why does this work? Why doesn't it? Can we then go back and prototype differently? And this, although I've presented this, and it's often presented as these very, defined steps, in fact, the design process is not linear. So you can jump around between all of those and go backwards and forwards. It's really important that you hold lightly any kind of solution that you might have in mind. Because when you go to test it, you may well find that actually this solution doesn't work. I thought it would do this, or we as a team thought this would be the ideal solution, but actually we need to pivot and we need to do something else. And that's the process really of steps 5 and 6. You're testing, you're implementing, you're assessing, and you're refining. And you're working through each one of these steps continually to try and improve your process. Now, although we're using the D-School approach, in the United Kingdom, there's another approach that's really lovely too. And I'm going to talk through this briefly. It's called the double diamond. It has the same kind of values in that when you're coming to solve a problem, always put people first. You always begin with people. And so the discover phase of the double diamond starts with understanding, how do people use this service? What are their needs, strengths, and aspirations? So it's very similar to the empathy stage in the D-School model. The second step is to define the problem. Again, you can see this is very different, very similar. And then in the second part of it, and that's very much exploring the problem. And then the second diamond is very much about developing and delivering what a solution might look like. So we're in the challenge phase in the first diamond, and the second diamond is in the outcome phase. It's very important to realize that, yes, there's lots of similarities here actually, and it's about putting people first. It's about communicating visually and inclusively, so using prototypes and sharing those. And the reason that's so important is it helps people gain a shared understanding of both the problems and the ideas we might use to solve those problems. It's all about collaborating and co-creating. So we're working together and we're being inspired by others. And of course, always iterating. That is, we're trialing different ideas, proposing different solutions. We're being very open-minded about, we're just experimenting here. We're going to try this, and if it doesn't work, we're going to tweak it, and we're going to develop something else. And it's very important. And what I do like about the double diamond approach is they emphasize the importance of engagement and relationships between different citizens, stakeholders, and partnerships. And they also emphasize the importance of leadership. Okay, and as leaders, we have to create the conditions that allow innovation and a design thinking mindset to thrive. Okay, and so that means you might have to try and change the culture a little bit, where actually you accept that we want to try new approaches and different ways to doing things. And that means that we might try something and change it, try something, change it. And what we produce, the first variation might not be the final variation. So at their best, the value of design thinking here is it's really about creating a safe space for us to experiment, to share and connect, and to come up with some kind of innovative ideas of solutions that we might not have talked about before. So we need to create, and we'll talk in other modules about the importance of psychological safety and creating a space where people feel like it's safe for them to put their hand up and share their opinion, and it's safe for them to say, actually, this idea that we're going down, it's not going to work in this context, and this is why. And so it's really important that we create the safe space where it's like a learning space and also a bit of a solution space where we're collaborating together, and we're understanding that we're working inside complex systems and we're working on wicked problems. And that means that we have to approach problems differently and see things differently. And that's what the design thinking process gives you. Now, when it comes to design thinking, it is a mindset, and there's probably 5 characteristics to be really, really aware of. First, adopt a beginner's mindset. Be curious. You know, we've really got to try and, I guess, put down our professional identities and put up this kind of beginner's mindset and be open-minded to asking questions, you know, being a bit vulnerable and saying, actually, I don't know how that works. I haven't done this before. I'm wondering what you think. So really focus on that curiosity, the beginner's mindset. That's probably the first and most important thing in design thinking. Be open-minded. Secondly, and critically, always start with humans, okay? What are their priorities, their frustrations, their pain points? What are users? What's the user's experience? What are their needs? What are their experiences and knowledge? So we always begin with empathy and that user-centric in this. We're aware of the problem, okay? So we've got to dwell in the problem space. We've got to deeply understand the problem. And that can be hard because we want to race. We want to race really hard, really fast to a solution. But actually in design thinking, we've got to hold ourselves back and we've got to just really think long and hard about the problem. There's a number of tools we will give you to support you and your teams to dwell in this problem space. Of course, wherever possible, we need to leverage diverse perspectives, okay? And so it can be interdisciplinary and it's in partnership, okay? So to really identify the root causes and innovative solutions, we need multiple brains and multiple perspectives, okay? So we need that interdisciplinary awareness. And we need to accept complexity. We've talked before briefly about us, you know, living and working in VUCA times, volatile, uncertain, complex, adaptive. So we need to think in systems, we need to recognize the interconnected nature of components within a system. And this can help us identify how changes in one area might affect others. And we'll talk about systems thinking and a systems perspective in more detail later. But this is a really important awareness. You need to adopt kind of a mindset of experimentation about taking action, testing, and deploying the visual language of design so everybody's on the same page. So design really heavily relies on prototypes, the tangible representation of ideas. Prototypes are the visualization of concepts of ideas. And it's important to get user feedback early in the development process using prototypes. We need to embrace experimentation. We have to, as they say, fail fast and fail forward. Gather feedback and learn from failures. It's not a failure. It's actually first attempt in learning. Fail, first attempt in learning. That's what the acronym stands for. It's our first attempt in learning, and we're using this to refine and develop a great solution. We need to visualize the ideas. The value proposition and the vision of idea must be communicated in a way that connects clearly with people and with others. So it's really important to do that. We can tell memorable stories and use images, and we need to also co-create. Design thinking helps in solving problems through a focus on co-creation. So I think you'll be surprised. I know sometimes I am about just the wonderful, practical and innovative solutions that emerge through active and collaborative experimentation and feedback. And there is a bias towards action, okay? And I do appreciate this. It's not about lengthy planning behind closed office doors, developing the ideal approach. Actually, design thinking lives in the doing. It's about engaging with end users, building and testing prototypes. It's hands-on, it's iterative, and it's emphasizing action and real-world interaction. Develop solutions that really meet users' needs. I do have to add in a caveat here. Innovation and whole system change, it's not linear, it's not simple. And there are no quick fixes. Like, these are complex problems and sometimes they're going to need complex solutions. But if we can engage in a design-led approach, we can use design thinking and co-design and kind of active inquiry about the user experience. And if we can do that, if we can support some locally led initiatives, then we can actually really generate some innovative responses to the wicked problems that are facing us. And we can create this critical mass of change agents that's needed. I love this this graphic about, you know, as people saying it's magic. No, it's design. I think, you know, when we do design thinking really well, people do think it's magic, but it's not. It's actually applying a design thinking process and methodology to the challenges that we're facing. You know, in design thinking, it flips the script. So in a traditional project, you know, we'll have the scope really fixed, okay? And then we estimate the resources and the time, but the scope is fixed and that can't change no matter what. We are going to develop an app. That's where we're going, okay? Or whatever it might be. But in an agile, adaptive design thinking project, the project triangle is flipped, okay? So we have some really clear about the resources and time that we've got, but the scope, what we might do, that is open, dependent on user feedback and what we find in our exploration. When we think about innovation and design thinking, it's important to think of, I guess, three critical things. Is this desirable? Is this change that we're talking about, is it something that the end users, they desire, they want? Does it delight them? Is it something that they're like, yes, this really improves my life? So desirability is a really important domain. Is it viable? Can it actually be done with the money that we have? Is this something that's actually doable? Is it viable? And finally, is it feasible? Is it actually going to work? Have we got the technological capability to make this happen? And I think this kind of thinking about the three dimension of innovation, desirability, viability, and feasibility is a really good framework for thinking about, is this innovation going to work in this unique context with the reality of what we have facing us? Tim Brown, who really brought design thinking to the masses and to the business world, talks about how design thinking is, and I quote, human-centered approach to innovation that draws from the designer's toolkit to integrate the needs of people, the possibilities of technology, and the requirements of business success. And if we just keep those things at the front of mind, then we're going to be more likely to develop the kind of solutions that actually work in the real world. And I want to end with a bit of a design dictionary, because I think it's important to think about these things as we're learning, because you're learning, you're learning to become a design thinker. And so you need to know these words. Design visioning is thinking about the future, okay? Design is a futurist. We create ideas that do not yet exist, okay? So design visioning. And we're using that with our dialogue. We're like, what might be, what could be? Human-centered co-design is about designing with, not for people. It means sharing power and prioritizing relationship, because we know that such partnerships often lead to breakthrough innovations. The wisdom, I often think, and there's a great saying, the wisdom's in the system. Okay, the wisdom is in the system. That's the people in there. Let's find out what they think. Design prototyping, really important. It's a tangible representation of an idea. And these, prototypes will really vary in the degrees of fidelity and the detail and the functionality. And it can just be paper and cardboard or sketches. And whereas high fidelity prototypes are much closer to the final version. And design mindset is a way of being and thinking. They're action-orientated, solution-focused, positive and imaginative. We know that we can create a desired and improved future together. Talked about design thinking, has 5 or 6 steps: empathy, define, ideate, prototype, test, and assess. And of course, design doing. Don Norman, who's famous psychologist in the field, talks about how we need more design doing. Design thinking by itself is not necessarily magic, because we've actually got to do things. We've got to go through this process of creativity and come up with some solutions, and then actually implement change together. And so you can see here the 6 key steps in design thinking, starting with empathy. Learn about the audience for whom you're designing. Define, refine, and focus your questions based on your insights from the empathy stage. Ideate, come together, brainstorm, and generate creative solutions. Prototype, build a representation of one or more of your ideas to show to others. Test, return to the user group and test your ideas for feedback, and then implement and assess. Those are the steps in the design thinking process, and we are going to walk through each and every one of those in great detail and give you the tools you need so you can deploy design thinking in your workplace. So in this first module, we've talked through the foundational concepts of design thinking and its value in driving creative and effective problem solving in various contexts. And the next modules are going to dive much more deeply into each of these steps in the design thinking process.